Danny Roddy of DannyRoddy.com, and today I'm talking with Karen MCC of VisionAcceptance.com and author of Eat Something Sweet, You'll Feel Better. Today, Karen and I will discuss empathetic listening, unconditional positive regard, and authoritarianism. In addition to thanking Karen for talking with me today, I'd like to thank my patrons for making this show and all the content I produce possible. If you'd like to become a patron, please go to patreon.com/DannyRoddy. As always, please do your own research and come to your own conclusions. And in the spirit of William Blake, the true method of knowledge is experiment. Without further ado, here is the show. I was telling you last time we talked that the whole way I make money is through coaching, which is basically just offering information via email or through Skype. It's not, I don't present myself as an expert. I'm not an expert in anything, maybe Seinfeld. And the only, like, I have so many notes. Like I have I have like 4,000 notes. So if somebody gets a blood test and they have a high prolactin level, I can be like, hey, this is what I know about prolactin. Read this, check out that. Here's what Ray says. He's obviously a resource that I think's really useful, and such. And try to help them as much as possible without telling them what to do, because as you think, just like I don't think that's very productive.
Right.
And I was explaining to you last time we talked on the phone that sometimes people got really upset when they'd be like, hey, listen, man, like, tell me what to do. I need your exact guidance. And I felt like 2 or 3 people stopped the coaching thing, and that was really difficult for them, that I wasn't necessarily telling them, hey, eat this, this, and that, and take these pills. And
you were trying to work with them to find what was right for them.
Totally.
Rather than just tell them.
And I don't know if it's like the Socratic way of doing things. I used to work at Apple, and we would occasionally give lessons to people. So it'd be like people that had never used a computer before. And they told us, like, use the Socratic method of teaching. And so somebody'd be like, well, how do I make a folder? And you'd be like, well, how do you think you make a folder? And it was like similar. And people would get like enraged, especially if you weren't good at what you were doing. If you just had like a little bit of understanding of what that method was.
That's smart, though. I'm surprised you did that.
There are some really good teachers there, like people that really enjoyed it.
Uh-huh.
But I think it goes back to, like, if you look at like an overview of health, and I think you and I agree on this, it's like not so much nutrition that is like poor nutrition as the main thing that's making everybody sick, as so much as things like authoritarianism, or people not being able to take their situation and mold it into something they think is productive.
Right. I mean, it's a culture of imitation. So we just, somewhere along the line, we decided that the answer wasn't inside of us, it was outside of us. And it gets reinforced all the time. I mean, if you just want to talk to your friend and let them know what shaped your life, you're just letting them know of a struggle that shaped you, because our struggles define our life, or define parts of ourselves at least. And then all of a sudden they're solving you. It took me forever to catch it and be like, wait, stop this. No, you're not going to solve me. I'm just letting you know what happened to me. I interviewed this guy, Bruce Levine, who's an anti-authoritarian psychologist, and he's been on various media. And in the interview I did with him, he mentioned a statistic that 1 in 4 people feel like they don't have a friend that they can confide in. And part of that is we're in a culture of solving and being solved outside of us. And when somebody's trying to solve you and not listen to you or accept you, then they don't feel like a friend. So this is a way we can heal each other and take power, away from the authoritarian ideas, is not solving each other.
I think you're totally right. You told me an interesting story that you had at the rock climbing gym about just letting the person vent and not trying to hide the pain. It was a loss of their cat.
Yeah. I feel when we listen to people, a very good way, and it's surprising. Like, I had to discover all this stuff along the way because people weren't listening to me and I needed a lot of help, and they couldn't see past themselves. And it was very terrifying because people just kept seeing you as an extension of themselves and what they would do. And that's not going to help. And it's not going to help. What I learned is that people are trying to take away the struggle and take away your pain. But the best way to listen to people, and that's a fair desire, I guess you can say. But when you do that, you're saying to the person that you shouldn't have this pain and you shouldn't have the struggle. But everybody has a lifelong struggle. And I've never in my life got an email from someone that said, thank you for solving my lifelong struggle. Like, it doesn't even happen. Why are we even shooting for that? So basically, I faced a lot of my feelings, and I'm not saying I'm good at this. I'm just saying I throw energy at it and I'm willing to discuss it. But I feel like I face a lot of yucky feelings. And so when people are in pain, it doesn't scare me like it used to scare me. So it was really sad because I love my cat more than anything, and she was in a lot of pain, but I didn't try to take away her pain, and I didn't try to take away her struggle. And just listening and supporting her, getting her feelings out, I know she felt way better because it got back to me through her friend than it did. And it felt better for me as a listener. And I felt alive and I felt moved by just the human story that, life is pain. And I think that's one of the key concepts of Buddhism anyway, that all life is sorrowful.
That when you were talking kind of reminds me of some of the times I've been like the most productive or when people have really criticized me. And I was at that moment just like so energized and like, well, I'm gonna like make something new, or like, and like without the hurt of the criticism, that like new feeling wouldn't have arisen. And I was telling you a story. I have a roommate who was having girl issues, and my immediate idea was to like throw different situations out, and he was like, Dan, I just need you to like listen to me.
Yeah.
I don't know why it like took me so long to like it took like me 30 years to like figure this idea out. But like you were saying, when anybody has a problem, throwing out possible solutions is like the last thing the person actually wants to hear.
Yeah, sometimes we definitely are looking for advice and discussion and even battle, because that's enlivening, like a good argument or something like that, if it's done right. But when we're dealing with the idea of healing something within us or our feelings or a chronic struggle, there's such an overemphasis about solving somebody and taking away their pain and being solved. It's not about negating advice. It's just about balance. So it's the idea that we can sort of use some of Carl Rogers' idea of unconditional positive regard. And I know you know more about Carl Rogers than I do. So I know you even said in a video, you told me that people would even get pissed that he wasn't solving them.
Well, I think I had heard you talk about Carl Rogers before I had ever looked into him, but I
am attracted to his ideas, but I think you really went deep in learning about him, which is great.
I'm amazed at like going back and reading Albert St. Georgi or going back and reading Carl Rogers and being like, oh my God, these are so Ray. And that when I hit something like that, I'm motivated to read more. Mm-hmm. And when I was looking back at Carl Rogers' work, I didn't know that he had like YouTube videos when he was an older man.
Yeah.
And at this point, he is a like prominent psychotherapist. And these are recordings of people in their psychotherapy sessions with him. And they're really interesting to observe.
Right.
Because the person is like, I have this problem. I'm feeling this way. What should I do? And he's like, you're feeling this way. You have this problem. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
This goes back and forth till some people are genuinely upset. They're like, I'm upset right now. Like telling him this, I need your advice. And then he'll just do the same thing over and over, like in a really like good, like, smart way. Like there's obviously some skill to how he's talking back to the person. Uh-huh. And it's what I guess reinforced these ideas even more, because at the end of these sessions, granted they're on YouTube and they're filmed, like it seemed like the person reached some point of catharsis with this style of psychotherapy. And it seems like I don't know that much about psychotherapy, but it seems like to it resonated with my experience of talking with people.
Yeah.
And also, Carl Rogers is the one that said, I think you don't perceive like somebody else does. So in like a situation to you, it's almost worthless to like, especially in a healing context, to say, well, I would do this, this, and that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, it's not.
I call it in my head, just for my own reference, driving in your own lane. And it's like if you're driving in your lane and then 2 lanes over, you're trying to tell someone how to drive while you're in your lane, and maybe they have to avoid a dog that's running in the like you can't do it from where you're at. They can, though. I think if we had this mindset that if we work on ourselves and we face our own pain and we come to terms with it, that life is struggle and pain. I mean, it's not only pain and it's not only struggle, but that is an important component of life. And I remember the video you sent me about the Matrix, and Agent Smith said, well, they designed a perfect human world where everyone is happy and none suffered, and it was a disaster. So that speaks to the idea. It's really a theme of life, and you have to face it. And if we could do that, then I feel the world would really be different, because I think in the end, when we're looking for an authority, we're trying to find somebody to help us avoid pain. And I mean, it's reasonable, it's understandable, but you're better off doing that if you're in charge of your own life, if you have your own intuition and feelings and the felt sense and all that's very, very subtle, and it takes practice. And we don't get that practice when people are trying to solve us. So, and it's funny you mentioned the Carl Rogers therapy thing, because I think I was a sophomore in college, and I did this 100 hours of training for telephone counseling. And it was so intense. It was very, very intense. And the book was long, and it was a lot of hours of training. And when I signed up for it, I thought you would get calls and you would solve their problems. But it was not that. It was 100 hours of learning how to listen, essentially, and helping people to solve their own problems and maybe providing community resources. And I didn't appreciate it as much at the time because I was very young and immature. But as time passed, and especially now in my life, I'm like, oh my God, that is such a amazing resource. They're basically taking people in the community and having them serve the community as listeners and resources. And you don't have to pay $200 an hour for a therapist. So it was very amazing experience, but it was just learning how to listen. And you had some protocol for like a suicidal caller or homicidal caller or a psychotic caller, and it was easier to handle those calls than to just listen to somebody and let that happen, not filling the space with noise. And it does take less energy, but it takes more presence and awareness.
I forgot, or I'm remembering something where there was a robot, and the people, it was like an experiment where a robot was had these like pre-programmed listening responses to a person. The person was thought they were like talking to a live computer, and this was like in the 60s or something. And a lot of the people like didn't want to stop talking to the computer, even though they knew it was pre-programmed. And I think that reinforced the idea that listening or somebody listening to you is like such a rarity.
Yes.
And I think that proves that idea pretty well. I think also you hit the nail on the head the last time we talked, that trying to heal in any capacity is incredibly difficult and incredibly painful. And just as an analogy, reading Ray's work and how technical it was and how much I didn't understand was extremely painful. Like, I didn't want to learn about glycolysis or oxidative metabolism. Those things seemed so complex and so over my head that it was I'm not exaggerating, literally painful to try to learn about it. and that still happens when I try to learn something about Gilbert Lang or something. And yeah, I think it's, you said it, it's courageous to want to do those things because you have to sit in the uncertainty and the unfamiliar territory of the unknown.
I mean, I think that's what we try to avoid because we're looking for the final say on something. And then there's so many people who are willing to be the final say. And you just like
Totally.
I've seen on some people who teach nutrition or that's their thing, and I've seen their Facebook following group, and I feel like they're almost outright abusive of their followers. They're so arrogant and I'm like, oh God, I just feel bad. But I know we talked about emailing Dr. Pete and like sometimes like he's helping you along the way, but then sometimes for whatever reasons he may not answer. And that's even better. You've told me it's having to find the answers yourself made you learn more.
Yeah, the one of the specific examples, I think the first time I ever emailed him was about like gummy bears,
Yeah.
like a total waste of an email. And the second time he was talking about calcium and serotonin, and he thought that the amount of calcium in the diet was one of the most protective things against an excess of serotonin, which is like an idea that's mostly unique to him.
Yeah.
And I I had like a limited amount of resources, and I certainly couldn't get full texts of papers or anything like that. And I wasn't really familiar with PubMed. I thought it was too confusing. And so I emailed him and I was like, hey, can you clarify the calcium serotonin statement that you said on so-and-so's radio show?
Mm-hmm.
And he just didn't reply. And so that question was unanswered, but I really wanted to figure it out. And it motivated me to try to figure it out with the limited resources I had. So like you said, in that situation, it was really beneficial that he didn't reply to me,
Right.
because I would have never tried to figure it out otherwise.
Right. And that's how you learn how to learn is sort of on your own. I mean, it's definitely good to have support, and then when you're on the flip side, when you're offering people support, sometimes you can see how the person sort of wants you to get in their head. And then you feel it in you when it goes off because it feels very tiring, the exchange. And maybe they just need to think about things a little bit on their own.
I think that's the exact thing Ray said when he was asked how he felt about like continuous emails. He's like, oh, I think people should just think about things before they email me.
Well, that's the same thing I think that the Apple Store was trying to instill in people, ironically.
Yeah, and the boomers did not appreciate it most of the time. But just, I mean, considering I grew up with my parents who are boomers, they are extremely respectful of authority.
Yes.
For instance, sadly, my dad yesterday had a stroke, and he's okay, but that just reinforced the whole idea. Like, he knows what I do, and I don't really expect him to take what I'm saying as any kind of truth, but he's going through the motions of the hospital system,
Mm-hmm.
which just everything he's told me seems so counterproductive so far. And it's really sad to see somebody kind of subjected to the system, but also allowing themselves to be subjected to the system. And so, yeah, that was kind of fresh in my mind for the conversation.
You know, it's really hard because I think, like I've had a lot of dental issues or whatever, so I've had to go to the dentist, and I tried out a bunch of various dentists. One tool I've found for dealing with when you have to deal with medical doctors in any way or dentists or anything is to just tell yourself, I can get a second and third opinion. And it sounds stressful and it sounds like it's going to take time and money, but it's actually less stressful because you don't feel stuck. You created options. And so there's this one I was talking to, and I mentioned something that I studied on my own, and he poo-pooed it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not allowed to have answers. Sorry, I forgot. Like, you forget because, you get spoiled by Dr. Pete a little bit.
I dump on doctors a lot, but there was one doctor that sticks out in my mind that we kind of formed a relationship where I'd go in and he'd order labs for me, and he wasn't familiar with the labs, so he'd call me and be like, what, that test you ordered, like, what did it mean? And that was like 1 out of 20 doctors that I had been to that seemed pretty genuine in wanting to learn more.
Right.
But yeah, you have to be your self-care advocate. I just feel like you'll get screwed otherwise.
Exactly. I was in a small lawsuit because my car was sold to me under, like, it said it wasn't an accident, and it was. So I had to deal with that, and it took a long time. And I was really involved. I helped the lawyer a lot. If I hadn't have done that, then we wouldn't have been able to move forward on certain things because nobody's going to work as hard for you as you. And I think you are going to need a dentist or a doctor or to rely. You're going to need a doctor for one reason or another. You are. That's just life. And I feel like you need to learn how to build a relationship with the right person, but don't settle. There are some people out there that are willing to work with you and listen. That's the whole key. That's how you know you found the right person, whether it's a friend or whether it's a dentist, is that they're listening to you.
Revolutionary concept.
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting because there was a quote by Pope Francis, and he said something about the old needing care and companionship and the young needing work and hope. But the problem is they don't even look for them anymore. And I thought that about listening. We don't know what to even look for in a listener. We don't even know about unconditional like I had to teach myself what to look for in a listener. And it was hard to find. And sometimes you can't control another person's actions, but there's times where I've told the person, I'm like, you're distracting me from my feelings a little bit.
Do you want to define unconditional positive regard just for somebody that's never heard of it?
Well, from what I see, I'm no expert, but from what I've read, it's a therapeutic term, and it has to do with letting the person find the answers within them. That's where the platform for interaction starts, that the person believes, the therapist believes the answers lies in the client. I mean, I don't know if you would agree with that from your studies of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that jives pretty well with what I've read.
Yeah. So we're all a little bit of, a dentist or a little bit of a lawyer or a little bit of a therapist, just so we can navigate the world. We have to learn about some of these things. And I think it's a valuable attitude when you're listening to someone who's in pain. I mean, you don't have to be that way all the time. Sometimes you want to disagree. Sometimes you want to tell the person what they're doing is annoying or whatever it is. But when they're in pain or dealing with a chronic struggle, it's a useful thing to know about. And I remember I used to babysit this little girl, and some people run sort of anxious, and she did. And whenever I babysat her, she would tell me something that was on her mind. And every single time I said this, I could see it just quieted her down so she could find her own answers, so she wouldn't be stuck. And I'd always say that's natural, no matter what she said. Like, so-and-so was mean to me today, and I got mad. And I'm like, that's natural. It's about acceptance and belonging, because I really feel the worst feeling in the world is the feeling that you don't have acceptance or belonging. That what you're going through doesn't have belonging, and people can't see it, and you feel rejected. And then when that happens, I found in my own life, when I've been the most critical or intolerant of other people, it's because I'm like, wait a second, I don't feel like this is being accepted or seen.
To bring up another story and to prove your point, I think it was Matt Stone's blog, and this was maybe in 2011, and I had written an article for him and was active in the comments. And I don't know, for whatever reason, I thought like swearing was like really cool. And it just made me come off like kind of a douchebag. And I would go into the comments, and I think I mentioned I was super self-righteous with Ray's ideas. And this comment thread on his really popular blog, I think at the time he had like one of the most popular blogs, and it was like several hundred comments. And then finally somebody read through all mine and was like, hey, Roddy's really aggressive and he uses a lot of like curse words. Like obviously whatever he's doing is not working for him. And I was like, oh, like how dare you?
Right, because you didn't feel your ideas would have acceptance because it was new or and it's different. So you get armored. You're ready for battle.
Totally, like the thickest armor imaginable. And then that gentleman's comment just like stuck in my head, and I was like I don't know at what period of time, but I was like, that is so right. And that's when I years later came across the actual concept of Wilhelm Reich's character armor.
Oh, really?
which is amazing. And then I read a baldness paper that actually talked about Wilhelm Reich's character armor in balding men, which it was like a 1951 paper. And I was like, oh, are you kidding me? This is insane.
Yeah.
So all tied together.
Yeah. I mean, I get like weird ideas all the time and run them past people, and you get excited, and then you forget who's better at receiving this idea or somebody else. And then you say something and it falls flat, and it's hard not to react. but then you just remember the other friend that might like it. I go to a rock climbing gym, and that experience has healed me on a gazillion trillion levels. I could talk about the rock climbing gym and the sport for hours upon hours upon hours. And it really taught me about differences and how differences can fit in. And I think when you have a place that has belonging based around the love of something, you know how they say like love heals the world? I've never understood that. Like it's never rang true for me because it's hard for people to receive love. It doesn't feel good. We think there's an agenda behind it. But if you love something, if you love life, and if you find an activity that's sort of like a metaphor for life, then you see how love saves the world, how it could save the world because you feel so alive. And climbing is very life affirming. There's so many metaphors for life in climbing, and it's helped me to put all these pieces together. And climbing is painful. Your feet hurt, your fingers hurt, your forearms hurt, everything hurts. And that's a part of it. That's a part of it. But at the same time, you're in a building filled with people that are going through the same thing. And you support each other and you encourage each other. And there's just such a variety of people there. And when I came back to the climbing gym after being gone for 7 years, this was 3 years ago, I was like, am I going to find friends? Am I going to be accepted? I don't know if I'm going to be good at climbing. I have all these weird things that I've been through. And climbing equalizes every difference.
We talked about it a little bit, but the Carl Rogers has a section on the back of his book on becoming a person. And one of the things he noticed with all of his patients was that they had more tolerance to like differences and individuals. And that was just part of the therapy. And I thought that was pretty interesting that he noticed that in multiple people.
Yes. You just see how when you have something that's centered around positivity and enjoyment and learning and not negating pain and not negating struggle, then all these differences can fit in. Like all you have to do, you can be overweight or out of shape or an old person. All you have to do is love the sport. That's it. And you're in. You're in the community. We'll love you and take you. Jung said something. He said the deeper that you go into the psyche, the deeper the layers, that the less individual we are. And that's not to say that individuality isn't important. I mean, texture is everything in some cases. But the climbing gym is something that taught me about the sameness, about transpersonal things or enjoyment, transpersonal enjoyment of life. The other thing about climbing too, not to go on and on and on about it, but you don't give people, it's called spraying beta, and you don't give people the solutions to the climb because the climb's like a puzzle and there's a crux to the climb and you can give people insight on how to climb it if they haven't climbed that climb yet. And you don't do that because the person wants to figure it out themselves. That's how they become a better climber. And yeah, they're going to fall. They may flail. They may, whatever it is, they may feel beaten up that day. But you do not keep them from that. That's the whole reason why they're there.
Everything you're saying makes me think of my time playing music.
Yes.
And like everybody plays and I'm not everybody, but there's a different way of playing like anything and it was always what felt most comfortable to the person and like what they enjoyed, how it sounded and things like that. And also, I don't know if you're not really vocalizing during the rock climb. And that reminds me of something Ray said where he thought it was important to do daily activities where you weren't like reading or talking. Okay. And at least when I moved to San Francisco, I think in 2012, I didn't have a guitar and I was like really depressed for a little while. And then suddenly dawned on me, I was like, you don't have a guitar. Like you have no like outlet just to like, play anything.
Of course.
And sometimes I think about like how sad life would be if I couldn't, not that I'm an excellent guitarist or anything, but just playing something and turning off my, that part of my mind is so necessary. I feel like for a day-to-day activity.
Yeah. I mean, everybody needs that passion because through that passion that you love, you'll be forgiving of the pain and the struggle because it's teaching you so much and you're getting so much out of it. And it really is something that is a metaphor for life. I really think that if we hadn't negated so much pain and struggle and created even more, then it's easier to feel that love of life. Like, it's in us. It's already in every person, the love of being alive. You just have to clear away all the noise. And for me, it's the passion of rock climbing. If you're working on the hardest climb and it's taking you months, you don't have to explain that to anyone. You just have to be like, I have a project. You know what I'm saying? I'm working my project today, and everybody knows what that means. We don't need all these words. I mean, I really think that for all the words we have, we fail a lot of communication, and people just get it. And that's how it should be when you talk about your lifelong chronic struggle. For me, it's sleep. So that person can go into their lifelong chronic struggle and just sort of have that moment of compassion. And that's what you like about the gym, or when you're working on something in the guitar and then you're like, oh, I'm trying to get this piece, or I'm working on like a very famous hard piece to play. And you say it to one of your guitar buddies, they get it. There's nothing more needs to be said. They're going into that place mentally to sort of have that compassion. And it just shows by not only what they're saying, but by what they're not saying.
Do you want to talk about a very special Genie? I just had a chance to read it. I thought it was really well done.
Oh, thank you. That is a kid's book that I tried to write about unconditional positive regard, which is basically, again, I got this idea from a kid I used to babysit, and she asked me to tell her a story instead of read one. It was like breaking cobwebs off my mind. I felt so self-conscious. It was so hard. And I'm like, this is just so awkward, but I'm going to push through this discomfort. And so I started making up stories, and then I wanted her to interact. So I just came up with this idea of a genie. Instead of granting 3 wishes of getting something, she granted 3 pieces of advice. But then I would turn to the child and I'd say, okay, what's the advice for the kid in the story? And then it tickled me and made me laugh so much at their wisdom and how smart kids are for their lives. So then I'm like, well, maybe I can write this out and make it available to people and see if they want to have the same experience for their kids.
You're such a good writer.
I just want to keep coming up with, whether it's the first book or this book or any interview I've done, like the one with Bruce Levine or Pete, is anything that can help people navigate authoritarianism or healing from that.
I was fortunate to be investigating health at about 2006 or something. I remember starting to read about fish oil and supplements almost pretty quickly after high school, and I graduated in 2004. So I had been reading about lots of different ideas, and some of the ideas that are really hot right now were actually really popular back in 2006.
Okay.
And for example, the MTHFR mutation, that is totally a cyclical fad diagnosis, just like adrenal fatigue. And when I forgot, must have been 2009, 2010, when I was doing the podcast with Chris Kresser, paleo advocate. He would say things that I knew were fad things to say about different situations. And if I hadn't had that really limited historical outlook on these things that would arise in health,
yes,
I wouldn't have known that I at least formed an opinion that he was wrong about specific things.
Yeah.
And then you take somebody who, like Ray, who is like, well, if you want to talk about something, I'm going to go back to the 1800s.
Yeah.
and really blow it open, I guess. And that is so important, what we were talking about, any topic. And it takes a lot of investigation. And I think it might have been one of your interviews with Ray, but the spoiled child attitude that our culture has created. And
it was an email.
And a lot of people don't want to do the basic investigation because, like we talked about, it's hard, it's painful, it hurts. But you'll probably be a better person if you do the limited investigation.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, I see Dr. Pete as a historian first and foremost, and that's taught me a lot of how to see things. Again, the history is about the big picture, and we're so lost in the weeds right now. I feel our culture is that is what brings healing, is the big picture, not getting lost in the ego or the weeds, but sort of seeing how you fit in the big picture or relating to people transpersonally beyond yourself. And if you want to understand the way a fad came to be in the diet world, or the use of a drug, or if you want to understand your best friend, you have to know the history behind all of it. And we really have this thing where we get in the way of each other's history and talking about who we are, and instead we're just trying to fix it all. And I think we really miss out on connection when we do that, and we really miss out on a chance for healing and compassion. And the powers that be are not going to make it easy for us to take away a little bit of their power. Principal's not going to be like, how can I make a kid stand up to me better? But one tool that we have for each other that we can start with is just listening to each other. That one small thing. That one thing of just letting each other be and having that belonging and just reaffirming life, like, wow, life is pain, life is struggle. But then if you feel that, then when something's beautiful, you're more apt to be present for that. So it's really remembering the big picture, I feel, to try to heal some of these things that frustrate us. We don't have to, change is not out there. It's not about changing your doctor's mind. It's not. It's about learning who you are as a way of change and then relating to that. You can't control how someone's going to listen to you, but you can show them. And I'm telling you, I'm not even great at this. I'm barely even aware to remind myself to do this. I know there's much better people out there. If they'd give it a shot, they'd be much better. But it makes a difference just throwing a little bit of energy at this. And there's a myth people can look up if they want to. It's the myth of Percival when he sees the wounded king. There's this wounded king that's his woundedness is connected to the barrenness of the land. And so Percival sees him and he wants to inquire about him, but he doesn't think it's knightly to do that. So it takes like 5 years of more trouble and going in circles or whatever the myth version says. And then finally he says, "What ails thee?" And that's what heals the king and the land. And it's very mind-blowing, that myth. So I guess that's what we're speaking to tonight, just to wrap it up, is that's the theme we're trying to address, is that myth.
And listening as opposed to directing.
Yeah, and you feel better when you do it. Maybe only one person in your life can listen to you the way you want to be, but you'll change because you're bringing that changed experience out through yourself, and it does have an effect. As a matter of fact, you have to be careful because people will want to tell you their problems all the time. You really have to watch out for the pitfall of people consuming that in you if they don't know about boundaries or if they don't know how to do it themselves.
Karen, thank you so much for talking with me today. Where can we find more of your work on the internet this week?
On my blog, if you want to go through old articles, basically it's the same things I write about, which is doing work with yourself and facing your feelings and just trying to get other people's insights into that too, sometimes with interviews.
Where can they read A Very Special Genie?
They can get it on my blog, which is where the other book I sell is at.
Envisionandacceptance.com?
Yes.
You are so awesome. Thank you so much for talking with me, Karen. Thanks again.
Thanks, Danny.
That's going to conclude this week's episode. I'd like to thank Karen again for talking with me today, along with my patrons for their support of the show and making all the content I produce possible. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a thumbs up if you're on YouTube. That helps support the show, and leave all comments and constructive criticisms in the comment section. Thanks again. I think I'm going to talk to Georgie about heart disease next week, and then we're going to have an episode on osteoporosis and then the Q&A episodes. So look out for those. Thank you so much for listening. I say it every show, but we have an awesome listenership, and I just am overwhelmed by the positivity for the show. So thank you so much. Talk to you guys soon. Take care.